Hello and welcome to the first edition of the AviaDev Insight Africa Connectivity Update for 2025, the podcast offering a deep dive into the route developments to, from, and within African aviation. I'm your host, Jon Howell, CEO and founder of AviaDev Africa. We are a platform dedicated to supporting the development of those routes to, from, and within the African continent. Now, back in December, we dedicated the final episode of the year to look back on 2024, and our protagonists nominated their award winners and nominees across multiple categories. But now we are back to the business of looking back at actually really the last 2 months of route announcements. So we've got a bumper episode that's going to take us all over sub-Saharan Africa and beyond. To discuss these topics, we are joined as usual by our two protagonists. So first of all, we are joined by Chief Regional Troublemaker, Jon Mendis, who comes armed with a quiver full of opinions and a bow of knowledge to deliver those opinions. Jon brings over 20 years of experience in the industry, including stints managing airports, commercial airlines, and also cargo airlines and startups in Africa and the Middle East. Joining Jon is our resident aviation and wildlife expert, the Lion King himself, Behramjee Ghadially, an aviation consultant with over 20 years of experience supporting airlines globally with their network planning and strategy, and most of that time has been spent supporting airlines in the African continent. As always, before we start, I need to say, of course, the opinions of my guests are their own, but as you'll hear, they are, as always, backed up by compelling reasoning and argument. So it is now time to fasten your seatbelts as we start our taxi out. Welcome to the January 2025 Connectivity Update. Okay, welcome back, chaps. And let's start with a carrier that's made an appearance in every single podcast since we started. That is Ethiopian Airlines. The airlines recently announced they're going to launch Hyderabad in India from June the 16th using their 737 MAX 8 3 times a week. So Behramjee, I think we want to come to you first. And you said you've got something interesting to share on this, but talk to us about the Hyderabad route.
Sure. Firstly, Happy New Year to everyone who's listening. Ethiopian announced new flights to Hyderabad starting this summer from June using a 737 MAX 8. The market for Africa to Hyderabad is not that big, to be fair. Ethiopian doesn't care about the point-to-point markets, mainly concerned about connecting various African cities, small pockets here and there to fill 5 to 10 passengers per OND for Hyderabad. The biggest market for Africa to Hyderabad is Nairobi, which is not surprising considering the number of Indians that live in Kenya. That's about 15,000 passengers a year, followed closely by Cairo, which is a surprise, 10,000 passengers a year. The point-to-point market for Addis Ababa is relatively small, only 3,000 passengers a year, but that should be stimulated as the flight starts. But what I found very interesting, which I'm probably sure the Jon would also not know, is that the 6th biggest market from Hyderabad to Africa is Mogadishu, Somalia. It is actually from 5,000 passengers. So it's actually the biggest market from Somalia to India, bigger than Bombay, bigger than Delhi. In fact, it has more than double the demand of Bombay and Delhi. And I found that very interesting. I don't know what type of people from Hyderabad are attracted towards Somalia. I do know that Somalia's economy and real estate market has boomed quite a bit post-COVID, because I've seen a few documentaries on YouTube.
Jon, let Jon jump in, Behramjee, because obviously Jon spent a lot of time in Somalia.
This was something I actually looked at when they launched as to what the top 10 markets were, and I saw Mogadishu on the list. So I didn't know it prior to that, but, I did know it. And I think, that's an important thing that Behramjee points out. This is not an OND route. This is a route that is Hyderabad to Africa. And, I'm going to add 2 things, which, if you've heard me discuss Ethiopian and the new routes, you'll always hear me talk about the interesting scheduling of this route, because unlike most of their other new routes, which tend to come in traditionally, at least introduced on the main banks, which is the morning bank or the evening bank, this route is what we call a split bank flight. So it departs off the third bank and comes back on the morning bank. And consequently, it actually sacrifices a fair bit of connectivity, but also then focuses on specific markets. So, for example, Nairobi, which is the largest market from Hyderabad, as Behramjee points out, is not going to be connected well at all. There's going to be like 8 hours sitting on ground when you're flying from Nairobi to Hyderabad. But on the flip side, it has some very good connections to markets like Mogadishu, to Johannesburg and things like that. So it actually has very good connections to, I think, six. It has direct and immediate connections to 6 of the top 10 markets out there, including Addis itself, which is obviously why they've decided to do this on that bank. Flying it off the night bank would require basically an entire aircraft dedicated to it and 20 hours on ground in Hyderabad, similar to what they do in Bengaluru. Bengaluru and Hyderabad, they're not very far from each other. They're both cities in South India, and it is already flying 3 times a week to Bengaluru. And the Bengaluru schedule flies off the night bank, sits on ground for 18 hours, and then comes back, the 2 days later, effectively. And that's very poor utility. But then if you look at what the markets are from Bengaluru versus the markets from Hyderabad, it makes a lot more sense to run Hyderabad on this because of the top 10 markets and where they're going to run their connections from. So it's interesting. But let's add why Hyderabad and why now. The key thing is the India-Ethiopia bilateral air services agreement has had 5 gateways permitted for Ethiopian to use until now. And those 5 gateways are Mumbai, Delhi, Chennai, Bengaluru, and Hyderabad. ET flies double daily to Mumbai, flies double daily to Delhi, was flying 3 times a week to Bengaluru and 3 times a week to Chennai as of last year. However, so because of that, they weren't able to actually add Hyderabad flights. However, the new aviation minister in India is from Hyderabad, effectively, and consequently, we're seeing a lot of India's bilaterals revised, maybe not necessarily to include Hyderabad, but definitely to create situations where Hyderabad and the surrounding areas are getting a bit of a boost, traffic boost. So last year, I think it was around October last year, India and Ethiopia agreed not to add new gateways, but to increase the number of flights available for Ethiopian carriers from 35 to 38 weekly flights. And immediately, ET raised their Chennai from 3 to 4 weekly, which we covered already. That went into place in December, and announced now. And I mean, this was an open secret. They obviously, the moment they increased to 38, we knew Hyderabad flights were coming. The only question was when. And now we've got an answer as to they've been announced. We know the start date, and from my perspective, we know the schedule, because I think that's very important. And it's a giveaway in terms of which markets ET is going to be targeting. It's going to be targeting basically the third bank markets, the Entebbes, the Johannesburgs, the Mogadishus, and the like, as opposed to the Nairobis. And that, we've said this before, that missing Nairobi flight off the third bank, which is being delayed due to issues between Kenya and Ethiopia on traffic rights, is a huge hole in ET's network. And that third bank is never going to realize its full potential until that Nairobi is plugged in the middle. They've got Mombasa, but they don't have Nairobi on the third bank. And that's going to need to change.
Yeah, great. Behramjee, anything you want to add?
Just about Entebbe to Hyderabad, that's 9,000 passengers a year, which is quite decent. So again, a nice niche market for them to target in terms of getting volume. As Sean pointed, the schedule calls for a 1600 departure from Addis with an arrival back by 6 o'clock in the morning. So on the way back from Hyderabad, it connects to all of Africa. Plus it connects to New York also via Lome, New York and Washington. So obviously that's not going to be the main target market, but it is for Karachi and Dhaka, unfortunately. But on the whole, I do not know about the bilateral being increased to 38 flights. Thank you for pointing that out, Sean. But the 38 flights has no capacity restriction, correct? Because I just saw on Amadeus a few minutes ago, as we were discussing, they've published for Mumbai from April 5th onwards a double daily 777-300. Though I know that could be rotated around a 777-200 at times, depending on the advanced load, etc. But it's just published like that for the first time I'm seeing.
As being a regular flyer on the Mumbai route, I think 1 in 10 times the aircraft that I book with versus the aircraft I actually fly with 2 weeks later has not changed. So literally 9 out of 10 times they will switch a configuration, switch an aircraft type, switch it back, switch it again, until you're actually on board that aircraft. And I wouldn't even say on board, because I've actually been not on a Mumbai, on a Dubai once, where we actually boarded the flight and then they disembarked us and moved us to a different plane. So, then until your plane has actually taken off, don't count on that being the aircraft operating many of ET's routes. They will swap the aircraft around depending on capacity. And the way their fleet is structured, effectively, they can do that. I mean, most of they've got they've got commonality between the 777s and 787s. So basically a 787-8, a 787-9, a 777-200, and a 777-300 all use the same crew. The same pilots are cross-qualified across all four types. So basically they can just literally change a plane whenever they want and not have any crewing issues. Basically, the only real restriction is they can't switch between the Airbuses and the Boeings at short ranges.
Yeah, of course.
They can do that on turnarounds, and they do. So most of the intra crews are not layover. Those will change again at the last second. But on layover destinations like Mumbai, even some of the Africa like Johannesburg, where the crew do layover, they can't really swap those. But it's one of the many things that ET uses to its advantage. And, it's the stuff that happens behind the scenes. The scheduling, the fleet choices are all give them the ability, because Africa is such a late booking market. Sometimes you get a surge of 100 passengers booking 2 days before the flight. It's great. You can just add an aircraft for the 100 more literally at the snap of your fingers if you need.
Yeah, I think, look, we talked about it a lot from a flexibility perspective, and that iteration that Ethiopian keep doing. They keep looking at how do we improve and where do we look. I think you've given us really good insight into why Hyderabad and obviously the top markets and everything else. So we'll park that one there. We've got loads to get through. So let's move on to the next one, which is, this is a route we've discussed before, and it was due to launch a bit earlier than it did. And I think that's due to aircraft availability and the obviously the fleet being expanded. And that is South African Airways to Dar-Es-Salaam, which launched on the 20th of January. So it's a daily flight that, of course, competes with Air Tanzania, who started this last year. Talk to us about this one in terms of how the wider fleet ambitions of SAA. Is that the only reason that this was slightly delayed? Will it be successful? Sean, do you want to start with this one?
Sure. So yeah, you're absolutely right that this flight was supposed to have launched fourth quarter last year. But when I spoke to SAA off the record, they said there were some crewing constraints, I think was what they used. So basically, I think they needed to recruit some more pilots and things to add to the fleet for what's there. Obviously this is the peak season for their domestic routes. So they've added a lot of capacity there. They've got the wet leased Sun Express aircraft from Turkey also flying a number of their routes. So, it's peak season. That's understandable. The beauty of this flight now again, and, maybe I sound like the scheduling wonk over here, but the beauty of this flight is it actually didn't require any aircraft. It is a pure utility flight. It departs from Johannesburg at 10 p.m. and comes back to Johannesburg 7 a.m. the next morning. So basically, this is using a plane that would have been parked overnight in Johannesburg anyway, and it is just flying to Dar-Es-Salaam and back. And, that's the ideal situation for an airline. It has great connectivity as a result. It connects from all markets, all domestic markets and most regional markets, which come into Johannesburg by evening, can now connect onwards to Dar-Es-Salaam, and vice versa. When they come back into Joburg at 7 in the morning, most of those regionals are out at 10 a.m. or thereabouts, and they're able to connect with those as well. So it's a no-brainer. These are low-hanging fruit, and SAA's initial announcement of this Dar flight, well, I'm not sure if it's an announcement, but the initial time they loaded the schedules into the system, I don't think they were open for sale. It was ahead of when Air Tanzania did it. So I don't think this is as much matching Air Tanzania as in Air. It was inevitable that both were going to do it. I think Air Tanzania may have been rushed to then launch by SAA's announcement, which then got deferred, and so Air Tanzania wound up going first. But, it's fine. I don't think this is going to affect each other as much. Air Tanzania's Joburg flight is very heavily dependent on India connections in particular. It is timed very much, and in fact, it is the shortest connection between Johannesburg and Mumbai, which is the second largest unserved market in Africa, as we've heard from Airbus. So that is targeting those markets. That there's enough of connection around, whether it's Tanzania to Australia, Tanzania to Brazil, Tanzania to Harare, Tanzania to Cape Town. SAA will connect their passengers. Air Tanzania will connect their passengers. It's Airlink in there as well. They will also connect their passengers. And I think that the people who will suffer will be like the Rwanda Airs, the Malawi Airlines, which did a lot of business from Dar-Es-Salaam via my little home airport, Atlanta, down to Joburg. It was an excellent connection, just 1 hour each way. And, I think they will be the ones who will lose out on this and will have to discount very deeply in order to just keep being competitive in those markets. So, good route, smart route, SA, for all the chatter we have about SA and how much I'm opposed to them fundamentally as existing as a state-backed carrier, the decisions they have made, not the chatter they've had in the background and talk about what they want to do, but I think they've actually decided on and done since they started off, with one exception, which was splitting their Sao Paulo route between Johannesburg and Cape Town. I have been in 100% agreement with what their network people have done. And I know their network people are regular listeners of this show, so shout out to them. And, keep it up, guys. You're doing sensibly. Don't let the politics and don't let the rhetoric of, we need to fly long haul to London and whatever else. Just keep doing what you're doing, and you will win over the skeptics by just making common sense decisions.
Yeah. The thing that comes out that we've talked about a lot in the last year or so is, of course, this whole idea of improving efficiency and utilizing aircraft when they wouldn't necessarily be utilized, almost like a bonus thing. That's obviously being forced by a lack of supply of aircraft as well. So airlines are having to be creative and having to sweat the asset a bit more, which we've always talked about as being a great way to obviously make your airline more efficient, more lean, make more money, right? Especially if you can fill that plane as well. Anything you want to sort of bring up on this route, Behramjee? Do you think it's going to be successful?
Yes, I will have a few things to say. Firstly, the market size between Dar-es-Salaam and Johannesburg point to point is 39,000 passengers per annum, whereas Cape Town is 7,500. So an overall market size of 46,000 from Dar-es-Salaam to South Africa on an average. But the problem that I see on this route is that there's too much capacity. SAA is flying a daily flight and Air Tanzania is flying 5 times a week with the 737 MAX 9. As Sean correctly said, the SAA flight is purely incremental, flying at night and coming back in the morning. So it connects to all of domestic South Africa, as well as few regional cities in the Southern African bloc. But to be fair, I think SAA will definitely beat Air Tanzania on this route in terms of the point-to-point market share. Air Tanzania will be focusing more on the 6 freedom connections via Dar-es-Salaam to the network to Bombay, Middle East and Eastern Africa and Lagos to feed the flight.
Don't forget, Airlink is also flying this more than daily. I think they're at 8 or 9 times a week as well with an E90. So,
that's even worse than
Air Tanzania and Airlink. So there's 3 competitors.
Yes. So that's 20 flights a week, or let's say 21 triple daily almost. And I think that's a bit too much capacity on a market which is less than 50,000 point-to-point passengers a year. So someone has to blink on this.
I agree. If you're looking at it purely on the O&D, yes, there is overcapacity. But as I said, it shouldn't be looked at as O&D. If you look at Air Tanzania, they are not selling as much the O&D as they are India. If you're looking at Airlink, just look at their schedule. Again, it's an overnight, it's 5 times a week overnight on, again, a utility flight. But that utility flight has the connections onwards to Lusaka, Harare, Vindu, and everything. Exactly. So those are not Tanzania to South Africa routes. Those are Tanzania to Southern Africa routes. And, you can't really get from Dar-es-Salaam to Windhoek unless you either go via Addis or you can go via Johannesburg, which is the logical hub for Southern Africa. So I don't think it's, if they're able to sell their connections well, and, obviously that is what they intend to do, I don't think this will wind up being an overcapacity situation. Certainly there may be some rationalization of it a bit, but SAA flew Dar-es-Salaam, pre-COVID as well, pre their bankruptcy. They had the daily. In fact, they had more than daily, I think. I think they had a double daily on weekends. And that flight would go in, very similar schedule. It would go in, arrive at Dar in the evening, overnight, and then leave Dar early morning. So, they're going back to what worked for them in the past, and I can't grumble. I used to actually take that flight a couple of times, Dar, Johannesburg, and then it connected perfectly to Malawi. In fact, sometimes it was the same aircraft, which came Dar to Joburg. Then the same aircraft was then doing, Joburg Blantyre. So, it's designed for that, and it did a good job. So I'm not going to grumble.
Okay. I feel even the volume, because I was just checking the connection market sizes to Lusaka, Malawi, etc. The market sizes for those are very, very small. So I'm just worried about even there are long connections.
It's incremental. It's incremental.
Yes,
and there's also Starline's partners and all sorts of stuff which which come into play on that. So I don't doubt SAA is doing the smart thing. I have doubts about Air Tanzania doing a smart thing, but I have doubts about anything Air Tanzania does. So that's not anything new. And I think the one thing over here, which I'd say probably will be reviewed, is Airlink's increase of capacity above daily. I think we might see that rationalized during the course of the year, because at the end of the day, that's going to be the odd man out.
Yes.
Because the other two are going to be very heavily reliant on that. While Airlinks, especially the daytime flights, which Airlinks are using, that aircraft can be deployed elsewhere.
Oh, yes.
The only thing that has going for it is largely competitive schedule advantage versus the overnight flight that SAA does. So, let's see how that plans out in time.
Yeah, great. It's a wait and see, and a really interesting market that, say the capacity's really been put in there. So let's see what happens and let's watch and wait. But Airlink are good at this. They go in early, and when the competition gets fierce, they'll look to redeploy it somewhere they can, they can make the money. All right. So we're going to take a slight departure on the next one, because it's not every day. We're not just going to talk about a new route. We're actually going to talk about a new airline now for Africa. And that is a new airline that commenced service just a couple of weeks ago. That airline is Air Sierra Leone, and they operated their first flight on Saturday, the 25th of Jan. So yeah, it was last week, from Freetown to Lagos using an Embraer ERJ 145. Sean, I know you were involved in this, so give us a little bit of the backstory, and because I think there's a Nigerian carrier involved in the project, and it's an interesting sort of model.
Yeah. So yes, Air Sierra Leone are a client of mine. So I'm a bit limited in terms of what I can say, but I've spoken to them and told them we're going to be mentioning them since they finally launched. So I did assist them with their business plan preparation, some of the data and stuff. But as you said, Air Sierra Leone has had its first flight last week. They were supposed to have launched before Christmas, but the typical issues, regulatory, getting all the pieces to come together. The airline is backed by the private operator ExeJet in Nigeria. So they are currently operating a Embraer 145 that is on the ExeJet Nigerian AOC. And it's privately owned and backed, and is designated by Sierra Leone. It's not a national airline, even though it's carrying the name Air Sierra Leone. It's a privately owned airline, but designated by Sierra Leone. So initial route launch was 3 times a week, Freetown to Lagos. That is planned to expand to other markets in West Africa using the Embraer 145. And long haul, the intention is to operate using an ACMI. This had originally been planned for Christmas, but now will probably be deferred because of, again, some issues getting the regulatory clearances and so forth. But using a Boeing 737 MAX was the plan between Freetown and the UK. And Freetown's not a huge market, not anywhere, but it's a very high yield market. It's you make a lot of money. Like Freetown to Lagos is multiple hundreds of dollars for what is basically a 2.5-hour flight. So there's a lot of money to be had there if you get things right. And Freetown to the UK is disproportionately large because of a diasporan traffic primarily, and which is why it's also very seasonal. So we did analysis on it, and conclusion reached by the principals in Air Sierra Leone is that there is potential for UK and regional flights. And, that's the business plan that has been developed and that is intended to be implemented. The beauty of this, of course, is because it's using an existing Nigerian operator with an existing AOC, which is ExeJet, there's already an existing infrastructure behind it. So, in terms of reservation systems are already there. AOC is already there. There is a backing of of an existing maintenance structure, pilots and everything. So you're not having to develop from scratch. If you look in terms of the way ET's got its airline in a box partnerships in Malawi, Zambia, A-Sky, whatever, it's a similar thing, but on a much smaller scale. And, I think it's a smart thing for Sierra Leone, and assuming that there aren't any external factors, which is a big if in Africa, I expect to see it be successful. It's not going to be, it's not going to be the next Ethiopian. I mean, Freetown Airport is not even capable of handling that kind of volume. But I think, it'll be successful in its niche, and its niche is to better connect Sierra Leone, and it'll do that.
Yeah, I think the thing that stands out to me, I want to come to you for some commentary on this, Behramjee, but the thing that stands out to me is the positioning from like a marketing and branding perspective, because I think a lot of people would look at it and go, Air Sierra Leone, well, that's the national airline of Sierra Leone, right? That's the positioning. But as you say, the country is getting the benefit of having its flag flown, and the livery is obviously the colors of the flag, etc. But it's actually a private airline, with all of this behind it. So it's a good halfway house for a government that says, hey, we want that connectivity, but we don't have to put the equity in, right? We're not actually owning that airline, but we're getting the benefits. What are your thoughts, Behramjee? It's your chance to obviously have a go at Sean's business plan here, or his input into the business plan.
Firstly, the Lagos Freetown market, I've also had experience at managing it when I was at Aricare. We used to fly, when I started at Aricare, it was flying Lagos, Freetown, Banjul, Dakar 3 times a week. And then I changed that to a more sustainable Lagos, Accra, Freetown 3 times a week because of the high amount of volumetric traffic between Accra and Freetown. So that route did okay for us. As Sean correctly said, the yields are very good on the Freetown route, mainly due to lack of capacity. Right now, you only have A-Sky connecting Freetown to West Africa and Central Africa. Air Kotowa don't fly there, correct?
They've been on and off.
And
they had some
Airpiece is based.
So I'm not sure if they're currently or not. Airpiece is flying it right now.
Yes. But Airpiece only focuses on the Nigeria market, so it's not relevant in my eyes. Yeah. So they're using a low-risk aircraft, an E-45. Yes, it would have baggage issues at times if the flight is heavily booked. But apart from that, it's a conservative launch. And what will be interesting to see is how the Freetown-London route fares once it gets launched with a 737. It'll be a 737 MAX 8 or a Dash 800. I don't think so. It'll be on a wide body.
Yeah, that was always the conversation. All right, fantastic. So we'll watch and learn and listen about that. So
just one thing.
Let me just add one thing on this, which is why I really love this project. It is private sector driven in partnership with government. Government is supporting it. Government's creating the enabling environment for it, but the money behind it, it's not the Sierra Leone taxpayer on the hook for this. This is private sector who sees there is opportunity, put the capital up and, reap the rewards if it's successful and, take the risks if it isn't. And I think that is a model which more and more people in Africa need to look at rather than turning to government saying, set up a national airline. You can set up an airline with your national name in it without necessarily taxpayer putting up the cash. So, if a minister or somewhere is looking at this, come call me. I'll help you. Or, just look at this as a model because there's plenty of smaller operators who can actually be very useful to you and their private sector as well without taking your tax money.
Behramjee, last word on this one?
Yes, I was saying if they do launch London, I hope it will connect to Banjul in both directions because it's only a 50-minute flight from Freetown, and the market from Banjul to London is much bigger than Freetown to London, and especially during the winter season.
The intention of London, especially off-peak, peak season certainly, O&D, London, Freetown can cover all of it, but in off-peak, you've got to make London work if you're flying that even with low frequency, Accra, Lagos, Banjul. So yes, absolutely, that has to be the intention, and the numbers have been considered on that because you cannot make Freetown London in low season is, it leads like a stuck pig. It really, that market is ridiculously heavily seasonal. So without connectivity on Freetown, you cannot make that route work year round.
Okay.
All right. Fantastic. Right. Let's go east now, and let's focus on the East African region, but specifically the London to Nairobi market. So we heard that BA is going to increase Nairobi from 7 to 10 flights a week from July, but only, I think, for a short period. KQ, of course, is launching to Gatwick, which we've talked about. So I think the question here is like the changing dynamic. Is this simply a short-term solution to capitalize on the high season for BA and they've got the availability to do it? Is it a sign that they're doing a bit more? What is the impact going to be? A bit of commentary on this market. Let's start with you, Behramjee, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. So the British Airways increase to Nairobi is from the start of the high summer season, from 10th of July. They're adding a 3-weekly 787-8 service into Nairobi, in addition to their traditional daily flight, which is on a 350-1000. This new flight is departing Heathrow at around 7 o'clock in the evening and arriving back by 3:30 in the afternoon. Now, with regards to the UK, Nairobi market size is 351,000 passengers a year, but majority of it is from London. London alone contributed 304,000 of that. So that's more than 80% of the market that is London bound for Nairobi. Kenya Airways also has announced Gatwick flights. So they're also increasing London from daily to 10 weekly. And BA announced their increase just a few days or a week or so after KQ announced it. So it's basically, you can see I think what we're doing a little bit.
The BA
Yes.
wasn't announced, but it was actually loaded for sale before KQ loaded Gatwick for sale.
Okay.
It was a quiet soft launch in there, because I remember when KQ launched Gatwick, I went into it and I saw the BA flights were already loaded.
Okay. Okay. Yes, so it'll be an interesting tussle between the two carriers. BA obviously doesn't want KQ getting any further foothold in the point-to-point market, which is the highest yielding. The advantage that BA has over KQ is the transatlantic feed as well as the domestic UK. But the advantage that KQ has over BA is connecting all the hotspot East African cities which were colonized by the British before, the Dar-Es-Salaams, Entebbe. The KQ flight for London Gatwick is very well timed for corporate travelers, departing Nairobi at midnight and arriving back by around also just before midnight. However, when the flight arrives back into Nairobi, there are a limited number of connections. It doesn't connect to the entire network, but it has the few hotspots which connect. But good thing is both airlines are launching it from the start of the high season. So the initial loads should be high. I do not expect them to have any problems filling the airplane. But yeah, overall, this should do well. We'll get to see if BA reinstates this flight for the winter 2025 season or not. I don't see any problems for both carriers on this route.
Yeah, I think that's a really good analysis, and obviously the time of year that they're launching as well. I think the other thing just to throw into the mix, which I know we're bringing up later, is of course what it means for Uganda Airlines as well, because you've talked about the connectivity with through KQ that they can land in Nairobi and get across to somewhere like Entebbe. So what's the latest with that, and how does that fit into this dynamic? Were they planning? Do they expect for this extra capacity to be put into that market? And is there still room for Uganda Airlines? Maybe that's one for you, Sean, to just wrestle with.
Right. Or just one quick thing. When I was just looking at the GDS while Behramjee was mentioning this, I've noticed that BA has actually increased the capacity on that summer extra flight also to 351,000. So now both the flights are 351,000. So it was initially loaded as 787, but it's now showing 351,000 as well. So that's a huge amount of capacity BA is putting in. But how will this affect Uganda Airlines when they eventually launch London? That really is becoming our Emirates to Lagos. Will it happen? Will it won't happen? Kind of thing. So we should keep that as our next Emirates to Lagos. But yeah, Uganda to UK is 70-something thousand passengers last year. That's fairly sizable in its own right. Nairobi to the UK Kenya to the UK is well north of 250,000. These are sizable markets in their own right. I think Uganda Airlines will be targeting Uganda with their connections as the top up traffic, and I think 3 times a week can justify it, given the fact there is no competition. There is no other non-stop operator. If BA was in that market, certainly I'd be more worried. It's a different dynamic with BA and KQ both competing, because Kenya is 5 times the size of Uganda market there. So I don't think it's going to make the slightest difference to Uganda Airlines' decision to launch London. That is a whole separate saga in itself. But every comment I've had, the conversation I've had with them has been coming soon. And my understanding on that is, they're going to be in a situation where until they have an alternative A320 wet lease or their own aircraft, but probably a wet lease for the summer to cover their Nigeria routes, they're going to need to find something to cover those routes in order to bring the A330 on to fly London. They can't fly London, Dubai, Mumbai, and Nigeria with just 2 aircraft. So they need to cover those routes with something else, either by cutting a route or putting the A320 on it. And the A320 is better suited to their Entebbe to Nigeria route. It loses them less money, although all of them lose money.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing there is in terms of the timing. If they do launch, I mean, we just talked about it, that obviously BA and KQ are putting this in at high season time. So, that's got to be a consideration for Uganda as well, is to give it the best chance at launch. You want to obviously launch it when demand is highest. And this is another element that comes into the whole route planning, and you need to give yourself enough time to be able to actually market that too. But I see the Uganda Airlines, it's very similar to obviously what, with Rwanda being the one direct flight to Rwanda. So, okay, it's not the same size market, but it's the only option on that, right?
Yes and no. I think the main area where they're similar to Rwanda is the large losses that they have, which are being subsidized by government. If you look at they were just patting themselves on the back a couple of weeks ago because, and I quote, they successfully reduced their losses to only $65 million last year. If you define success by successfully reducing your losses to only $65 million, which has now taken their cumulative losses in just 5 years of operation to over $300 million, all subsidized by the taxpayer, you have a very curious definition of success. But then, when you compare it to Rwanda, who have been comfortably pulling 200 million euros a year from the taxpayer there for close to a decade, it's a race to the bottom. Tanzania, which we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars there as well. So when you look at all these guys, you really have to give a kudos to KQ, which have turned operational profits despite having the same fundamental structural issues.
Net profit.
So
it's also a very competitive market. Nairobi is traditionally very open. They've had AirAsia come in. You've got BA coming in. You've got all of these competitors serving that market as well. Okay, it's a bigger market, it's a more established market, but you've got a lot of competition. So I think that's an interesting one to look at. And we'll watch all of these with great interest for sure. So let's move on now, and let's actually look at a non-African airline, but one that's really put a lot of effort and a lot of energy into Africa in terms of its development the last few years. And we have a partnership with Discover Airlines because they've done a lot in terms of their connectivity to Africa. They were the airline that's flying from Europe direct to Windhoek last year when we did AviaDev there, and they're also flying to Zanzibar. So, a great way for the Europeans to get down to the event in June. And we'll have the full group represented at AviaDev in June as well. So let's start with Brussels. So Brussels Airlines announced in December it's going to increase, it is increasing its fleet to 11 long-haul aircraft. And it said, we're going to increase sub-Saharan Africa. That is a big plan for us. That is their big market. Up to 56 flights per week to the region, obviously on wide body aircraft. So huge amount of capacity, mostly West Africa, but the notable exception of, again, Nairobi, right? So that's becoming this huge market. So the whole sort of Brussels approach, I went over there this time last year, presented to the CEO just to talk about what's going on in Africa, what the trends are, what the opportunities are. I'm not saying that had any direct impact on this. I'm sure they were going to do it anyway, but of course I was waxing lyrical about the market and the need. This additional capacity is really going to help connectivity within the region and support the airlines that serve the regional and domestic markets. So why don't you kick us off, Behramjee, on this in terms of how you see Brussels and its role in Africa?
So when Brussels announced that they're increasing their fleet size of the A330s or -300s, which they only have of those types, which they use on more African routes, the intention was to initially make a lot of their triangle services into a non-stop terminator service, which brings in efficiency and brings in more revenue, especially for routes like Kinshasa and Kigali, which have very, very high demand for Brussels in particular. So that was one thing that was announced, that Kinshasa would become a daily non-stop terminator service instead of being tagged with another route. Then they announced the addition of Nairobi into their network. One of the reasons why SM Brussels does very well in sub-Saharan Africa, because not all routes have very high point-to-point demand to Brussels. The main ones are Kinshasa, Dakar, and Kigali. The primary reasons because of the feed that they get from United Airlines and Air Canada from USA and Canada. Air Canada from Montreal in particular, and United Airlines from Washington, Chicago, and Newark in particular. They provide a lot of feed to SM Brussels. Basically, for both airlines, for the destinations that they don't fly in Africa, United only flies to two routes, Lagos and Accra. But for all the other routes, both Air Canada and United use Brussels as their primary gateway for Africa. So they bring all their transatlantic passengers into Brussels, and then they send them on to SM Brussels, onwards to Africa. Routes such as Lagos and Abuja, where SM doesn't fly, Lufthansa flies. So Air Canada takes their passengers from Canada to Frankfurt, and then Lufthansa carries it onward. They get a lot of traffic from Montreal. Montreal is basically the francophone hub for African passengers. So SM Brussels gets a lot of traffic from Montreal bound to Dakar, Kinshasa, Cameroon in particular. Cameroon to Montreal is now 40,000 passengers a year. So it's actually a very good mix of success that SM Brussels is enjoying on Africa. They have a very limited European network. Don't have an expensive network like Lufthansa or even ITA has, but they connect the UK nicely for their Accra flights. And they connect France very well as few destinations in Italy as well. But the main target for SM Brussels in Africa, apart from point to point, is Paris, followed by transatlantic codeshare with United and Air Canada.
Yeah, great sort of overview. And I've taken that flight many times. I've flown across from the UK to Brussels and then wherever I need to go in sub-Saharan Africa.
I take it 3 times a year. Douala, Yaoundé, Brussels, Toronto, or Montreal and Canada.
Oh,
I will not be surprised if SN during the winter season adds seasonal flights to one of the beach destinations in East Africa, like Zanzibar or Mombasa, if they have excess capacity available. I just feel it's something that that they might do just on a seasonal basis.
Yeah, that's really interesting because that's part 2 of the question. So we may as well bring that in now. And part 2 is, of course, Discover have announced that they're going to fly to the Seychelles from October 2025 on A330-300. And that is very much designated the Lufthansa product for those leisure destinations. That may be worth bringing into this conversation as well, Sean, at this point, to just sort of say how Lufthansa is dividing its tour, its travelers.
It's a perfect time to bring that in, because that is exactly the point I was going to make anyway, is that Brussels, if you look in terms of how the Lufthansa Group has developed their Africa strategy, Brussels Airlines will serve only those markets that they can do an out and back within their hub backs. They are 100% leave by, 10 to 11 a.m. from Brussels and get back there early morning the next morning. If you cannot fit in those hub banks, you will not fly, no matter how large the market is or whatever. So a market like Seychelles from Brussels cannot happen because that is just too far to be able to do that. It'll require off-bank flying, which they don't do. South Africa from Brussels is a humongous market. I mean, we're talking, I think Cape Town from Brussels is I think it is the largest intercontinental market that is not served from Cape Town. It was served by Belgium for a bit, but not anymore. Johannesburg is a sizable market for Brussels as well that's not served. So that's a huge market. But Brussels Airlines discipline as such in terms of needing to schedule everything. And they have, because of their cost structure and the need for that, they have to sweat those assets literally 24 hours a day. And this is the way to do it. So they fly it into Africa and get it back by early the next morning. And, lather, rinse, repeat. Those planes are always in the air. There is no way that they will be able to fly to somewhere like a Seychelles. Zanzibar might be at the edge of it, But, also, Brussels Airline, it's a segmentation Lufthansa has done. Remember, they've got so many brands within the Lufthansa group. You've got Brussels, you've got Lufthansa Mainline, you've got within Europe, you've got Cityline, Eurowings, etc. Then you've got Discover, which is the long haul product. Then you've got Swiss, you've got Edelweiss, which is Edelweiss is to Swiss what Discover is to Lufthansa. And now you're getting ITA, and you've
Austrian.
got so much within the Lufthansa group happening. They are segmenting this very clearly in terms of which traffic they want to route over which hub and how it goes. And if you look at it, where Lufthansa mainline flies in sub-Saharan Africa, that is business destinations. That is their premium markets where they can sell their first class, their business class, extract the thousands of euros that they do for a substandard business class product. Very happy to do that. And, the European business people who have contracts with Lufthansa anyway, or chasing the renewal of their HON status, they will do that and spend the ridiculous amounts of money for a substandard product. While then you look into Swiss is very niche. Swiss is, I think it's Joburg and Nairobi, Dar. Is there anything else they even fly in sub-Saharan? I think that's pretty much it. So Swiss is a non-player. But then you look at what
they fly to Cape Town. Edelweiss, they fly to Cape Town in the winter.
Is the Discover of Switzerland. So it's the Lufthansa Group leisure market specialist. So it'll go to the Windhoeks. You did Windhoek on Edelweiss, didn't you, John?
No, I flew to Cape Town with Edelweiss, and it was great.
Cape Town with Edelweiss.
340, big 340.
So, this is the way Lufthansa Group is structuring it. And I think what's really going to be interesting, and I know Behramjee will give us a half an hour lecture on this, is how ITA is going to fit into this. Because I don't see ITA myself deploying wide bodies into Africa. I think ITA is going to look at large narrow bodies and, more of a West African agenda from Italy, because that is where the largest O&Ds are from Italy that are less served, as well as where it's a hub and a fleet that have the ability to serve that better than any of the other Lufthansa Group aircraft and hubs to West Africa, with and the lower.
So let's just set that up and close this bit off, right? So the first thing to say is that we've covered this now. Obviously, the Discover product is the segmented leisure product, and it's serving the leisure destinations. It's a different product in business class, etc. So we talked about that.
Yeah.
We really wanted to talk about ITA or ITA, and Behramjee's been pushing this for months, but we were waiting for that final, tick in the box that they are now part of the Lufthansa Group, which happened in January. So, I really wanted to. I know you've been chomping at the bit for this, and Sean set it up really well. So, Behramjee, do you agree broadly with the way that kind of Sean's looked at this, and how do you see it fitting into the stable?
Let's put it this way: the geographical location of Rome for Africa is a bit more advantageous for ITA's strategy, because it's a shorter flight to begin with, so it can be flown using a lower risk A321 LR aircraft. Those aircraft can fly up to 8 hours non-stop with a relatively full payload. And unlike the majority of European operators, ITA has configured it in a premium configuration. It's not an all economy class 220-seater where there would be payload limits. So that's one thing. Secondly, Rome has a lot of point-to-point demand to many of these cities. Some cities that has much higher point-to-point demand than Brussels. It also offers the Star Alliance group, especially for the transatlantic carriers like United and Air Canada, an additional option from Europe to fly to Africa. You can fly transatlantic from US and Canada into both Brussels and Rome, and then connect on to certain markets in Africa. Currently, ITA only flies their A321LRs to Accra and Dakar. Both are sizable high demand markets from Italy in particular. They have more demand from Milan though, but Rome is steadily getting there. But the good thing is the A321LR opens up a lot of new possibilities for IT and the NH group in a much more low risk manner. Instead of wasting money sending an A330 or an A350, the A321 can cover destinations such as Lagos and Abuja, which are between 5.5 to 5 hours nonstop from Rome. So Lagos in particular, I would expect it to be launched within 2 years. Abuja may get a bit more time, but the Abuja yields are nearly 40% higher than Lagos, and it has much less competition from mainland Europe. And with regards to other destinations in West Africa that you could see an ITA product in the future, Abidjan comes to mind. The point-to-point market is around 20,000 passengers from Rome, but for whole of Italy, it's nearly more than double of that. Then when it comes to East Africa, this is where I feel there's a good niche for both Lufthansa and ITA to exploit, because the A321LR can fly to Nairobi, Zanzibar, even Kinshasa, Mombasa, and Kilimanjaro nonstop from Rome. All these flights are within 6.5 to 7.5 hours nonstop. Just to give you a few examples of sub-Saharan demand for Italy in particular, because that will be the primary focus. Lagos to Italy last year was 92,000 passengers. Nairobi to Italy, 55,000 passengers. Zanzibar to Italy, it was 111,000 passengers, but majority was to Milan. And for Zanzibar, it's more of a seasonal demand cycle, so they'll need a tour operator to get them rolling on that. Mombasa to Italy is 115,000 passengers. The good thing is with Mombasa and Zanzibar, they can do a triangle and to lower their risk and increase their frequencies at the same time. Kilimanjaro is 19,000 passengers for Italy. Again, it's perfectly suited to be as a triangle operation. So as you can see, all these routes can be formed with an A321LR. The only route where there is demand, but it will probably not make money, is flying to South Africa from Italy. For that, they have the A330-900neo, which is cheaper to fly than an A350. Demand is very big. From Italy to South Africa, it is 175,000 passengers per annum, out of which Johannesburg is 90,000 and Cape Town is 70,000. What they could do with the A330-900 is on a seasonal basis fly to Cape Town in the winter season. That's when they have excess wide bodies available and the yields are very high. So not only can they fill it with point-to-point traffic, but also transit traffic coming in from various other European destinations. So the conclusion is the potential for ITA, if they are disciplined enough and if they time their flights well, there's a lot of potential for them in sub-Saharan Africa, both in West Africa and East Africa. They just need to be aligned properly with the LH group, because they can't fly to all cities that SN, Brussels and LH fly. There'll be a duplicate of sorts. But there are good opportunities for them to exploit here and there.
Sean, I see a wry smile. Final comment on this one?
Well, you're looking at the irresistible force with the implacable object. You've got the Italians and you've got the Germans. And, when the Italians and Germans team up, you very rarely wind up with something that tends to work smoothly, even if the trains sometimes run on time. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right in terms of that. I think, if the ITA group is going to run itself, if ITA is going to run itself as an independent airline just with Lufthansa ownership, it will end in tears like every single iteration of Alitalia has done so far. But if ITA is going to be run like Brussels Airlines is, which is basically everything is dictated from Lufthansa, and they're just basically rubber stamping the decisions taken by Lufthansa Group. I think we might actually see a coherent strategy from them. And as I said, their location, their O&D markets, and their fleet types allow them to expand into a lot of other marginal markets, which Brussels can't do for various reasons, which Lufthansa can't do for various reasons, and which Discover is limited in terms of what they can do because of where Lufthansa, where Discover is flying out of, and the constraints they have in terms of growth in those markets for feeders and so forth. So the reality is, yes, I think we will see, I think you hit the nail right on the head in terms of the East Africa leisure markets. The East African coast from Italy is growing. ET has added Rome flights primarily to target both Johannesburg and Mombasa, Zanzibar, and so forth. Turkish is adding capacity again to these East African markets, again to target connections off these European routes. So I think Italy is becoming a bit of a battleground in that respect for the Italian leisure traffic, probably going to be to the detriment of some of the charter operators. You may see less NEOS and stuff like that, charters coming into these markets in return for additional scheduled flight. So yeah, it will be interesting to see it. I expect to see the deployment of the 321s rather, because that has been what ITA to date has used as their Africa strategy. If you look in terms of what they're flying in West Africa, Dakar, Accra, and so forth, and this is a beautiful product. They sent us a video of their product a couple of months ago when we were first planning to discuss this. And, we looked at that product, and it's, it may be an A320 family aircraft, but the quality of those seats and the quality of the premium economy and everything is the equivalent of any world-class product in the world on any aircraft type. You could, I've seen A380s which aren't as nice as that. So, they've invested heavily in product, as Italians, tend to do. The question, though, is, how much of a premium can they pull on this? Hopefully, their cost point is going to be significantly lower than the Lufthansa's, the Swiss's, and even the Brussels, so that they can make work with VFR traffic in some of these West African markets in particular, because the Abidjans, the Accras, the Dakars, and the like are they're high yield relatively, but it's price sensitive high yield, so they're going to have to be competitive at a price point that historically Alitalia was never able to obtain. Lufthansa Group, Miles and More, all the winners from the European side may develop that, but it'd be interesting to see. And I think a big determining factor as to whether it is successful or not is going to be how much the Italians and the Germans clash, and how likely it is that the German influence wins out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really interesting conversation. And I think that, Lufthansa will be in control here. They're going to say, you're part of our family now, but we will wait and see. And whether the Italians, as you say, will do that, because there's still loads of scope for them to develop within the group. Final word on this, Behramjee, and then we'll move on.
Yes, I would also like to add that for these destinations in East Africa and Nigeria in particular, majority of the point of sale is done in Italy and in Europe itself. So there won't be a currency issue for our ITA to have, especially for East Africa. More than 90% of the point of sale is done in Europe and Italy. So there won't be problems extracting money out of Africa to send back to Europe also.
Yeah, it's Europe to Africa rather than the other way around.
Yeah,
absolutely. Which is why, as you say, it competes so heavily with the charter side of things as well, and we'll wait and see what happens there. All right, you mentioned Turkish, Sean, and we're going to come to them very shortly and talk about their expansion. But just in between that, I promised Ashish from Air Arabia that we would talk about their new route, which actually started yesterday, because we are recording on the 31st of January. So that is 6 flights a week from Sharjah to Addis Ababa using a A320. So I think we're pretty bullish on this. Am I right thinking that, Sean? You're pretty confident on this one?
Ethiopia to the UAE is effectively, I won't say an infinitely sized market, but it is a humongous market. I mean, ET would put more flights. They're flying the largest aircraft they can find as many times a day as they can. So, I mean, I think that pretty much tells you what the thing is. Emirates is flying 777-300 ER. There's no shortage of demand in that market. They're just looking at capitalizing on it. And I think, I wouldn't be surprised. I know there have been bilateral and slot constraints in the past, which has prevented expansion in this market. I'm going to assume that has been resolved now with Fly Dubai flying, I think, twice daily on some days, Emirates flying daily, and now Air Arabia coming in. I'm going to assume that there has been some resolution of this, of the bilateral issues, and I would not be surprised to see Ethiopian match Air Arabia with opening Sharjah sometime, if not this year, but with a MAC at least to begin with, and potentially even more, over the course of the next few months. And Sharjah is a capacity-constrained airport as well. But, Air Arabia has got no choice. They've increased Entebbe capacity. I think, Behramjee pointed out that's up now to 10 times or 11 times a week. They've got, which is launching. They've got Nairobi. They've got a whole bunch of expansion happening in Africa. And that is a natural growth of Air Arabia. As you're getting, their traditional focus has been on Middle Eastern and India markets. They've hit their ceiling on India. There's no more bilateral rights available. Now they've got to be able to cross-connect markets, whether that's India to Africa via Sharjah, whether that's Europe to Middle East via Sharjah or whatever else. They're becoming more of a network carrier. And to maintain their levels of growth, they have to find markets. And those markets are going to be in Africa, because from Sharjah to Africa with an A321 or similar, that's a huge number of markets all throughout East, North, Africa, and so forth. So I expect we'll see a few more routes from Air Arabia and growth in the markets they already have. You probably see Tanzania growth. You probably see, additional growth in Addis. You mentioned 6 times a week. I was just looking at the GDS. I'm only seeing 3, but
3.
Yeah, if it is 3. Yeah, if it is 6, I could easily see it going up to 6. I would not be surprised. I see Somalia, I see Djibouti, all these markets, the Asmara maybe, they're all within the reach of it. They all have traffic going from the UAE. They have traffic the rest of the Gulf. They have enough traffic to India, Central Asia. These are pieces of cake. The low-hanging fruit again for Air Arabia as they move beyond, focusing on India as their primary market, which has been their traditional growth area, which is now constrained.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting, it's the evolution of this airline as well, that it was a point-to-point carrier, but with a central hub, and then it's almost become a network carrier through the connectivity it offers, right? And it has to then make that decision as, are we going to really focus on this as a market, or are we going to stay O&D, and then it's up to the passenger to kind of self-connect? But being so powerful in Sharjah, then it makes sense to try and make that a bit more seamless, that you can use 2 Air Arabia flights and be a bit more of a network carrier. So yeah, Behramjee, your thoughts from this?
Sharjah Airport's physical facilities are going to need significant upgrade for them to become competitive to Dubai. I mean, Sharjah is a great airport if you're just coming in and out of the UAE, because you can literally, if you are certainly you could have a very long bus ride, but from once you enter the terminal to when you're out there, I've landed at Sharjah and literally been in my car 10 minutes after landing. It can be that convenient because that airport is small. But at the same time, I've also taken 20 minutes between taxiing and busing and everything else just to get into that terminal. So, it is struggling. It's going to need some expansion. Its location is such that it's not going to be that easy to expand it significantly for terminal capacity. And I'm not aware of any mega project as such for them to do that. So that is going to be, whether it is already or will become a constraint on Air Arabia's growth. It is. Sharjah is constrained now at peak times because there's just so many bloody Air Arabia flights to everywhere in the region.
Yeah. Sorry, Behramjee, go for it.
Yes, I wanted to say 2 things. Number one, I was part of the team that launched Addis Ababa for Gulf Air in 2011. January we launched. We initially started with 3 times a week. The first 2 weeks, the loads were not that great because in Africa, you first have to physically land your aircraft into the city so that the locals trust your flight is operating or not. But after the first 2 weeks, the loads went very high and very rapidly they went up. So much so that within 3 months, we increased it from 3 to 6 times a week. And then there were some issues with Ethiopian Airlines and their conciliation, where the bilateral was changed from open skies between Bahrain and Ethiopia to a limited number of flights per week, and Ethiopian suspended Bahrain. So, but 95% of Gulf Air's traffic when I was there was GCC. The GCC to Addis Ababa demand over the last year was 600,000 passengers, excluding Jeddah. But out of that 600,000, 402,000 were just Dubai. And a decent amount of those Dubai passengers were actually live in Sharjah, between the Dubai-Sharjah corridor, because they're mainly traders. And so, apart from Dubai, Air Arabia will be targeting 6 freedom traffic to Doha and Riyadh, which are also very, very big markets from Addis Ababa. They'll be price stimulating the demand. They won't be offering 2-piece baggage allowance like the Qatar Airways, Emirates, etc. offer. So they will entice passengers first by the lowering the price and then incrementally adding the baggage add-ons. I definitely foresee this route being increased in due course. Surprisingly, I don't see Air Arabia in other East African markets that much, in Tanzania, etc. But I foresee them, like Sean said, it'll come. Yeah, it was good to notice that their Entebbe flights have increased from a daily to 11 weekly over the past year. That again is focusing primarily on labor traffic, the increasing amount of labor traffic that has been witnessed from Entebbe to the GCC. And the labor traffic demand from Addis Ababa is much higher in Uganda. So yeah, if the bilateral allows it, I do not foresee Air Arabia holding back. They will capitalize on whatever opportunities come their way in Addis Ababa.
Perfect. Yeah. And hopefully I'll get to, get Ashish on the podcast and we can ask him directly as well. That would be great. Right. So let's go to Turkish Airlines. So Turkish Airlines, very exciting. They have actually confirmed they're going to be at AviaDev in Zanzibar, which is super exciting. And they announced a huge expansion, or relatively huge expansion, from June 2025 into Tanzania, which is, of course, great timing for our event. So Kilimanjaro is going to move from 4 to 14 weekly, but we'll come to this in a second. Zanzibar 9 to 14, and Dar 7 to 10. Although there's some debate over numbers that's actually been published because of the routing and the fact that some of these are tagged flights, right? So talk us through this one, Sean, in terms of, what the actual overview is for Turkish.
I think Turkish is juggling their Africa network a bit. I think they're juggling all their networks a bit right now and trying to improve their connectivity. So what we're seeing now is that a lot of the East African markets are going double daily. Tanzania, the ones you pointed out. But that double daily is basically 2 flights leaving within an hour of each other, both with narrow bodies, rather than, flying a single wide body. And I think part of the reason for that is to free up wide body capacity to use in longer haul markets where they're better suited. There's no point flying, an A330 to Africa when you've got you've got 2 737s sitting around. You could use that A330 to fly to, I don't know, Tokyo or wherever else. So I think that's a big driving factor on it. It's certainly, it's great to have the increase in capacity, but it's great to have the increase in frequency, but the reality is, the capacity could actually be matched for just a single wide body there. So I think in Kilimanjaro and Zanzi, what they're doing is, I think there's one terminator, which just goes Istanbul to this destination and then comes back. And then the other flight does a triangle between those two, literally an hour earlier. So interesting. I think that's interesting. What I think is also interesting is, they've increased their services to Accra this summer as well. And that one is interesting because they've changed the schedule a bit. And I think this is interesting. If you look at some of their European schedules as well, they have stopped overnighting aircraft at some of these destinations. For example, London Gatwick used to have a flight that arrived late evening and then sat overnight, then departed early morning from Gatwick back to Istanbul. What it's doing now is that it's turning that flight around for a late night departure overnight from Gatwick. And, as they're increasing the number of those European stations which had these overnight red eyes, pseudo pink eyes, because they're not completely red, pink eye flights from European destinations into Istanbul, they will have a feeder bank to some of these African destinations, which they're relying on European feed from. And I think, it's interesting as we see how the schedule is going to push that. Now, that's not the case with the Tanzania. The Tanzania is, obviously an afternoon bank flight with a wider network feed. But I wouldn't be surprised to see if those are successful. By delinking it and by going to the smaller gauge, they have the ability of switching that maybe if that overnight bank winds up being successful and, that plays out. So Turkish, they are huge players in Africa. They've got their positioning right, both at the top end where they've got a decent premium product, as well as the bottom end where they can be very competitive on baggage allowance and fares and things like that. So they're doing Africa right. I'm curious to see how all this plays out because they make mistakes, they fix the mistakes, and they go on. And their African network is, I think, close to 60 destinations in Africa alone. I mean, a lot of it is North Africa, certainly. So, not really long haul and stuff. But I mean, literally, you're looking at places like Nouakchott and stuff like that. I mean, nobody else even thinks of where Turkish is in daily and more than that. I mean, there's even been rumors of Turkish going into the new Kumasi airport in Ghana, which they debunked. Just to stress this point, they debunked it. But, I wouldn't be surprised. 737 MAX Istanbul to Kumasi a couple of times a week. Sure, why not? They can make it work because they've got a network of 200 and something destinations at Istanbul to serve. And how?
Yeah, they've really focused on Africa. I mean, even on the other side, on the airport side, there's been some Turkish involvement in some of the airports there as well, especially in West Africa too, right? Yeah, and
Somalia, Turkey and Somalia, huge political, infrastructural, and a lot of issues there, which I will not go into on this podcast because we've only got about 10 to 15 minutes left on it. But one day, if you want, I'll give you the story of Turkey and Somalia and my experiences with them.
Okay, right. Well, we'll wait for that one. Anything to add on this, Behramjee, or has it all been said and we can move on?
Just one thing, as Sean mentioned at the start of the podcast, the incremental flying of Turkish to Zanzibar, like Kilimanjaro, increasing from daily to double daily, the flights are only timed half an hour apart from each other. So this, I feel, also allows Turkish the opportunity, say, for example, one of the two flights are not even 50% or 40% full, and the other flight is about 50 or 60% full. They can combine the two flights and operate as one. That could also be a possibility. Though not all the time, I hope, but certain times of the week where the demand is not so great, they could do that as a cost-saving measure. I did find it odd that they were just timing within half an hour of each other, but then that's where the main connections are to feed the flight accordingly. So that's why they did it like that, instead of using one wide body, which would have been more commercially sensible, but they don't have enough wide bodies to spare.
Yeah, so it's two things. It's de-risking and also looking at what inventory you've got available and what you can deploy, right? So it's being very pragmatic and, just working within the bounds of what you've got. So great.
And also remember, during July is a peak season for safari tourism because of the migration of the animals from Kenya to Tanzania. So that's also the reason why British Airways chose July to start their Nairobi flight, because the Serengeti to Masai Mara migration takes part in July.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, as Sean said, we got 10, 15 minutes left. So we're going to sort of rattle through the next couple. The first one's one that's very close to us because we were due to do AviaDev in 2020 on the beautiful treasure island of Madagascar. And we've been working with the Ravenala team there very closely over the years. And Emirates, they finally got last year. And Emirates have now announced they're going to increase flights to Madagascar from 6. From currently, they're serving it 4 times a week. From April the 2nd, it will go up to 6 flights a week. But of course, this does have its stopover in Mahe in the Seychelles as well. But just a no-brainer, right? The demand is there, and the route is performed.
It's not even just a demand no-brainer. This plane would otherwise be parked from, I think, 1 in the afternoon to 10 at night in the Seychelles, doing nothing.
So it's a utility.
Just park the plane doing nothing.
Yeah.
Just send it off to Madagascar, make a little bit, if you're covering the fuel, which you will, because Madagascar's got good cargo demand, both in and out, and it's very high yield. I mean, if you can get that vanilla contract, which I've done with cargo airline in the past. It is very, very lucrative yields out of Madagascar for export as well as for, commodities import. So no brainer, absolutely win-win-win for every party involved. So yeah, I think, Ravinala they've grabbed that low-hanging fruit and, made the most of it. It's been very succulent for them.
Very good. Very good. Right. Now let's get to the ownership conversations that have been rippling on that we've talked about on the podcast, but obviously there's huge movement here. And this is down in South Africa. And it was started, of course, by FlySafair and the questions over its ownership and what substantive ownership is. And it's all got very, not overly complicated, but it's also brought in other carriers as well and questions around their ownership structure as well. So what's the latest? I think you're best on this one to kick us off, Sean, and then maybe me and Behramjee can ask some questions.
The latest situation now in South Africa, there are two air services council. There's the International Air Services Council, which handles international licensing, and the Domestic Air Services Council, which handles domestic licensing. The regulation is they have different regulations, but essentially similar ones, which is that either a substantial amount of ownership must be held by residents of the Republic, or 75% ownership must lie with residents of the Republic. So the international says substantial, domestic says 75%. FlySafair and Safair Operations Limited, which is the company, their ownership is basically held by a trust whose beneficiaries are the parent company, which is ASL Group, and consequently ownership further flows into Europe and so on. The question is, and which has been under dispute by a complaint brought in by Global, the parent company of Lyft, is that basically, because of the structure of this trust, is Safair a South African company? The ruling has been by the council, by the Domestic Air Services Licensing Council, which is the really one that's relevant here, is that no, having a trust that is registered in South Africa with South African trustees, but a beneficiary who is not South African, does not constitute residence. But it has gone one step further. It has further gone to say that the term resident requires that the resident must be a natural person. Now, a natural person is basically, they differentiate between a natural person and a juristic person. A natural person is a human being who is physically living in South Africa, paying tax there, and is a citizen of South Africa, holding a South African passport. And a juristic being is a company registered in South Africa or a trust in South Africa. They have basically said that by the requirement of having a resident holding the 75% shareholding, that it is illegal for companies or governments or trusts to hold shares in a South African airline. A South African airline, according to the Air Services Licensing Council, I've got a copy of this, which was kindly provided to me this morning, actually, by Guy Leach. Thank you, Guy. Props to you. They have actually said that that effectively their ruling is that it is illegal for a company, for a trust, or for a government to own shares in a South African airline. This must be owned by a live, living individual. That has huge impact on South African aviation if it is eventually upheld. Of course, Safair disagrees. They're appealing it. And I expect to see that in an appeals court, an actual legal entity rather than a tribunal of laypersons, which has been constituted, to make judgment calls rather than actual apply the law, will overrule that, because the impact is huge. South African Airways would have to shut down because the government cannot own an airline, according to them. Airlink would be in trouble because their 25% non-individual shareholding is now held by Qatar Airways. So, they've got the Seychelles pension funds and stuff, which are shareholders over there. Those are trusts and, in their shareholding. Those wouldn't be allowed to hold it. I mean, pretty much everybody other than Semair, which is Miles van der Molen's little pet project, is, well, not little anymore, but Miles's project will struggle from not being able to have more than 25% institutional ownership or government ownership or so forth. It's a very bad ruling, although the more serious one is the one in terms of ruling that the trust does not constitute nationality for that. So there's multiple problems. Of course, there's a similar ruling on the international side, but that's a whole different set of cake. So Sapphire is in deep trouble. I spoke to Kirby a few weeks ago on this, and they are, well, he's pretty, they're still appealing in sub-judice and so forth. I think I would not be surprised if there's in panic stations over there, because they are going to have to change their shareholding structure to get through this. There's no way that they're going to be able to bluster through that. So on the ownership side, the 75% side, I expect there will have to be changes by staff there. But on the natural person side, I expect to see that a court will rightfully strike that down as being ridiculous, because that will have an impact in every sector, whether it's telecoms, mining, anywhere. It simply will not allow a company to hold a license. I mean, Vodafone, for example, if the requirement is that it must be a resident to hold a telecoms license, you wouldn't be able to. MTN, Vodafone, these are all companies. These are publicly listed companies in stock markets. And to say that they can't hold a license and an individual must put in personally billions and billions of dollars, that's ridiculous. I mean, this is where the whole Air Services Council logic falls apart. It's meant to be a council of lay people, but sometimes lay people deliver lay judgments rather than legal ones. And so that's basically where it stands. In simple. I get red for me, even though it really does.
No, I think it's fascinating, and it is that whole practicality. You can't expect that, and it's not healthy. I mean, that's not how big businesses work. If they're going to be publicly listed, they're going to be owned by the shareholders and by multiple people. So I think there's two things here, but I suppose if the whole thing is seen as, well, the whole thing is not fit for purpose, maybe the whole thing goes out the window and has to be rewritten. So we'll watch and see. And obviously in the interim, it needs to be said that obviously nothing is in place and the airlines are flying and things are as normal as they can be. But this is obviously simmering under the surface. We have no idea how long these things take. That is the other thing. It's kind of unprecedented. So it could take a heck of a long time, which I think in the interim
situation.
And depending on the strategy, do we want this resolved? Do we want to drag it out? And, whatever. I don't really know. And we don't want to weigh in on that. But I think the facts you've laid out are really, really solid in that respect. Any questions you've got, Behramjee, on that or input?
No, not really. Just that these archaic laws in certain African countries, surprisingly, which still exist in South Africa, they need to be updated. This is just too childish and too old-fashioned.
Yeah, 100%. I mean,
more time than I have to say this. This is my pet subject as well. Most African countries have signed up to the Yamoussoukro decision. One of the key provisions of the Yamoussoukro decision is shifting African ownership away, at least in terms of recognizing foreign operators, away from the archaic substantial ownership and effective control test towards the new principal place of business test. Therefore, if a company is headquartered, registered, and regulated by a certain country, another country who has signed up to the YD, who signed up to, Single AfroSATAM, they are obliged to accept the other country's nomination. But that doesn't mean they have to do it themselves. And I think that is very much cutting off your nose to spite your face situation, where you'll accept someone else doing it, but you won't allow your own people to do it. And that puts your people at a double disadvantage at that. So I think, yes, I completely agree. I've written extensively on this. You can read my old columns at Voyage Afrique on, on ownership issues in African aviation. But this is something where a roadmap to getting rid of this exists, yet so many countries have signed on to it, but are not implementing it. And that's the story of Africa.
Yeah. We talked about this, previously about the whole ownership and if it's holding back the development of African aviation. That's a big question and, something that's going to be determined almost a, Pan-African level. So we will see, but this is obviously playing out in public as well. So we're pretty much there for today, but there's just a couple more. Emirates are still flying to Lagos, just because we've got to check in.
Yes, they are. They are not just excellent. But when I spoke to them, they said it's actually doing very well. So I would not be surprised to see an increase in Lagos capacity and potentially a return to Abuja as soon as they've got, they're taking delivery a lot of A350s. That's going to give them ability to free up 777s elsewhere. I would not be surprised to see that some of that capacity deployed in Lagos during the course of the year.
Amazing. And Behramjee, Etihad launched Nairobi, and they have I saw yesterday, the office is open and the flight arrived and everything else. So we were a bit skeptical on this, but it's happened.
Just before I start on Etihad, the Lagos flight of Emirates, I'm just seeing the loads for the next 2 days. Their first class is completely sold out the next 2 days from Lagos, as well as their business class tomorrow from Lagos to Dubai. The airline which has obviously suffered a bit with their entry has been Qatar Airways. They've reduced Lagos flights from double daily to 10 weekly. So that's one consequence of Emirates restarting in the market. With regards to Etihad starting Nairobi, it's still only 4 times a week. It hasn't put a dent in anybody's market share as yet. We'll wait and they started during high season, so loads would be high in one direction at least. So we'll wait and see how they manage it for the next 6 months, especially between February and May. That'll be a good test to see in the low season how they manage themselves. But yeah, they're in Nairobi for the long haul. But their record in Africa, unfortunately, is not good at all. So let's see how it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to close it off there. There are some very recent stories that have come through. We're going to push those into February. So there's some bits on Air Cote d'Ivoire. There's obviously the code share with Air India and Kenya Airways as well. There's stuff happening all the time. So thank you to everybody who's stuck with us for the last hour and a half. And massive thanks to Behramjee and Sean for always doing their homework and being such great guests. You can connect with them on LinkedIn through the links in the show notes. Obviously, if you did enjoy the episode, it's completely free and open source wherever you want to listen. So you can watch it on YouTube. You can subscribe as well on whatever platform you want. And we will be back in February to do another one of these and look back over the last few weeks. But thank you to Sean. Thank you to Behramjee. And we'll see you for the next episode soon. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thank you.